The high-stakes meeting between the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Geneva has not resulted in any major breakthrough over the ongoing Ukraine crisis. However, the two top diplomats have now agreed to keep talking to try to resolve the crisis through negotiations. The two leaders met on Friday in Geneva in a bid to defuse the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The United States has agreed to provide written responses by next week to Russia's demands that the West scale back its military presence in Eastern Europe. Both sides said that Blinken and Lavrov plan to speak again, and they left the door open for another conversation between President Biden and President Putin to try to resolve this crisis.
I told him that following the consultations that we'll have in the coming days with allies and partners, we anticipate that we will be able to share with Russia our concerns and ideas in more detail and in writing next week. And we agreed to further discussions after that.
The White House press secretary Jen Psaki said that the White House did not expect any breakthroughs in the meeting, but added that both the countries are now on a clearer path in terms of understanding each other's concerns.
We didn't expect any breakthroughs to happen today, but we are on a clearer path in terms of understanding each other's concerns. The president will meet this weekend at Camp David with his national security team to discuss the situation.
Russia, meanwhile, has vowed more serious consequences if Washington keeps ignoring its security demands. Moscow has laid out a detailed list of security guarantees, which include a demand that NATO gives up military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. The Blinken-Lavrov meeting happened as an estimated 100,000 Russian troops continue to be deployed near Ukraine's eastern border. Russia's military buildup along the Ukraine border has sparked concerns of a possible military escalation between Russia and Ukraine. Moscow has time and again denied any invasion plans on Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, has left the White House for his countryside retreat of Camp David, where he will spend the weekend chalking out the strategy or the next steps with the national security advisors to bring out a solution to end this conflict. Not only the United States, but other European countries, in fact, have also joined calls for Russia to step back. The Bulgarian Prime Minister on Friday urged Russia to de-escalate tensions over Ukraine following Geneva talks between the US and Russia. Now, during a parliament session, the Prime Minister said that Bulgaria is a sovereign state and the country made a choice long ago of becoming a NATO member. Despite repeated peace talks, the ongoing tensions at the military front is showing no signs of abating as of now. In the latest, a Russian submarine has test-fired a Caliber cruise missile against a land-based target from the Sea of Japan. And this is according to Russia's defense ministry. All these developments come amid Russia's announcement that its navy will conduct a series of military drills this month. Russia's defense ministry also released a video on Friday of its army performing drills in Voronezh, which is bordering Ukraine. The Ukrainian joint forces also shared a video on Thursday of its military performing drills near eastern Ukraine. This happens as tensions continue to mount over what lies ahead in the ongoing conflict. NATO has now rejected all demands by Russia to withdraw its forces from Romania and Bulgaria. In a statement, NATO said that it will not renounce its ability to protect and defend each other. The Pentagon, meanwhile, has said that the USS aircraft carrier and its strike group will participate in a NATO maritime exercise in the Mediterranean, which will continue through February 4th. The Pentagon press secretary John Kirby in a statement said that the upcoming exercise is not anticipating a Russian move on Ukraine as of now.
It wasn't planned back in 2020, anticipating, a Russian move on Ukraine, and it's not designed. The exercise itself is not designed against the kinds of scenarios that might happen with respect to Ukraine.
To understand the situation a little bit more, we are now being joined by Catherine Quinn, an analyst from Ukraine. Catherine, thanks so much for joining us on WION at this hour. Now, we at WION have been tracking all the statements and developments coming from both Washington and Moscow closely. The two top diplomats have agreed to keep talking to try, in a sense, to resolve this crisis involving Ukraine through negotiations. What's your assessment of the situation as it stands?
Well, I think the first thing to note here is that some of the coverage of the situation is potentially misleading because this sort of scare that has erupted over the past few months has really shed light on a conflict that has been going on 8 years with over 14,000 people dead, and which is, when it comes right down to the dynamics of frontline fighting, which is really, a conflict that's really very static. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. That said, the situation with the diplomatic talks is, it's funny, talking to people here, people who are experts on the conflict, people say generally that they're sort of experiencing a roller coaster of emotions. So one day they'll feel that war is almost guaranteed based on the outcome of talks or based on sort of the tenor of talks. And another day they'll feel like, probably things are going to keep ticking along the way they've been going.
Right.
Today, the tenor of the talks was more reassuring, and it's a hopeful sign that the sides are ready to, keep exchanging words, at least for now.
Right. Now, Catherine, Russia says very clearly that it has no intentions of invading Ukraine, yet the West fears otherwise. Does Ukraine have any say in the events of the future? Why was Ukraine, for that matter, not part of these crucial talks?
Does Ukraine have any say in the events of the future? Yes, it does. There are plenty of Ukrainians, I think, as various Western outlets have been reporting, who are ready to join civilian defense forces, who, plenty of reserves who are ready to prop up the, 250,000 strong-ish army in the case of a broader invasion. That said, this would likely amount to a bigger and more destructive war, but wouldn't necessarily amount to Ukraine being able to change the facts on the ground. When it comes to Ukraine's sort of peripheral role so far in discussions, I think that the way that negotiations have proceeded in the past few months has sort of laid bare the hollowness of some of the Western rhetoric about Ukraine being, in charge of its own future. I think that, Ukraine's Western backers like to talk a big game about how much they respect Ukraine's agency, but when it comes down to it, they tend to take a pretty sort of realist approach to international negotiations. Right. The White House recognizes that, when it, especially in Russia's view, there's really only one country that matters when it comes to negotiations, and that's the U.S. And if you want to engage Russia, then to a degree you need to really rely on bilateral negotiations.
Right, Catherine, it's very interesting you say that as of now. My final question for you: how do you see the Russia-Ukraine standoff changing the geopolitics of the region? Experts recently have told WION that no one understands Ukraine better than Russia. What do you think about that?
I think that it's not surprising that many people feel that way. I think that, right, it's certainly true. I mean, I think that most people who know the region probably aren't going to argue with the assessment that the average Russian knows much more about Ukraine, feels a lot more connected to Ukraine, has more personal ties, likely has family ties to Ukraine. That the average Russian feels much more invested in Ukraine than sort of your average Brit or your average American. That said, do they understand Ukraine better than Russia, or rather, do Russians understand Ukraine better than sort of your standard a Polish expert or somebody from another Eastern European country? That's very hard to say, because at the same, there are certain Russian, even within fairly liberal parts of the expert community, there's certain sort of stereotypes and certain kind of types of tunnel vision that have taken hold, and they're very sort of hard to break. And I should note as well that in the past few years there have been bans on travel between the two countries, bans on men of military age traveling to Ukraine, which has really cut down on the level of sort of live exchange that people have, and it's led to a situation which I would say a lot of Russian experts probably think they understand the status quo in the country a lot better than they do.
Right, Catherine, thank you so much for speaking to us on WION at this hour, and thanks so much for all those insights. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.